While Valparaiso was cold and windy last weekend, the Northeast was pummeled with heavy rain, damaging winds, and even persistent snow. This snowprill, as residents so aptly called it, made travel very difficult for the millions of people affected by the storm. 50,000 homeowners lost power at some time during the storm, with half of those being in the hardest hit state of Pennsylvania. This storm was one that residents of the Mid-Atlantic and East Coast are very familiar with, a nor'easter. The term is thrown around in copious amounts in the weather community, but really what separates a nor'easter from any other storm? Professor of Meteorology Dr. Teresa Balz-Elsholz explains.
It's different from a normal low, a normal system that comes up the coast or goes across the coast, because you get cold air that comes out ahead of it. And so the cold air, like in Maine to the northeast of Boston or New York City, have that cold air sitting in place. And as the storm comes across from the Midwest, across the Appalachians, that cold air kind of keeps it from becoming strong, kind of stable, and so it can't expand and become a strong low. And as that low comes down across, it hits the oceans, and the oceans aren't as cold, and so then that storm can really spin up, we call it, and become stronger and faster. And so then it's not pulling, it's pulling that cold air around, and then it becomes a strong storm because it's got all this energy from the ocean, and it's strong enough that it torques the winds so that they're more northeasterly than maybe normally easterly or northerly type of a storm. And so you get strong winds, you get rain or snow.
The storm that hit the east last weekend began to form in the Gulf of Mexico and then moved over Florida. It then began to gain circulation and spin up, gaining moisture and energy that helped wreak havoc on the East Coast and farther inland. Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia had up to 12 inches of snow in the higher elevations, while Washington, D.C., New York City, and southern New England saw 2 to 4 inches of rain. It is quite rare for one of these storms to occur in April.
It could be as early as September, but maybe more October, because then you have a better chance of cold air to the north really setting in, or more that land-sea contrast, because the oceans are really, the topography of the East Coast really plays a role there, where having that difference between the colder land and the warmer water helps that systems become a little bit stronger. And then wintertime, still get that. You get the really cold air coming down off of Canada, and still get nice warm air coming up the Gulf of Mexico. And then still into spring, and we just saw in April, had a really nice, intense storm.
And nor'easters can cause hurricane-force winds, severe flooding, and coastal erosion. One of the most famous nor'easters in U.S. history was called the Perfect Storm, a 1991 beast that caused over $200 million in damage.
The Perfect Storm was, we were watching that, I worked at a radar site in Massachusetts, and we were watching the hurricane, I think it was Grace, out in the Atlantic, and then this developed, and it was really hard to tell at the time whether this was an outcropping of, was this Grace or not Grace. And then that storm developed, and then it came in from the east to the west, so it pushed the waves with it. And I can remember watching the TV coverage of just these massive waves crashing up against houses that were way up, not coastal.
It has been over 21 years since the perfect storm. Reporting for The Shield, I'm meteorologist Dave Caulfield.